maybe just stepping away from the UNRWA per se, I wonder if you have anything to say about the Israeli strikes today in Gaza. I think the latest death toll that we've reported is nearly 100 by eyewitness accounts. Many, if not most, appear to be civilians, children. I know you don't speak for the government of Israel, but as Israel's, you have anything to say about this?
We are deeply concerned by the loss of civilian life in this incident. This was a horrifying incident with a horrifying result. I can't speak to the total death toll, but there are reports of 24 children killed in this incident. No doubt a number of them are children who have been fleeing the effects of this war for more than a year now. We have reached out to the government of Israel to ask what happened here. We don't yet know the underlying circumstances. We have not gotten a full explanation from them about what happened. But you step back and look at where we are in this campaign. We are a year into the government of Israel's military campaign in Gaza. And Israel has decimated Hamas's military capabilities. It has decimated Hamas's leadership. It has, through its military action, ensured that Hamas does not have the ability to repeat the attacks of October 7th. And all of that, getting to here, came at great cost to civilians in Gaza, which is, of course, often the case when civilians are caught in the crossfire in conflict. And so that tragic cost to civilians continues today, quite notably in this strike, which seems to have claimed significant civilian life. And it is another reminder of why we need to see an end to this war.
And so why would you see, I mean, the Secretary himself also said it last week that he thinks that Israel's strategic goals have largely been met. I mean, so why carry out strikes like this, and what's the utility at this point?
So you have to take that question to the government of Israel. So I will say that as the Secretary said, yes, their strategic goals have largely been met. Now, there is a strategic goal that remains incredibly important, and that is to return all of the hostages. But as you have heard any number of leaders in our government speak to for some time, from the President to Secretary Blinken to Secretary of Defense Austin, it is critically important not just to the people of Gaza, but to Israelis and to Israel's own security, that Israel be mindful of achieving larger security, that Israel be mindful of achieving a larger strategic success, and that they be mindful of finding a way to end this campaign in a way that brings the hostages home and in a way that ensures their security, and not just continuing in an endless, perpetual conflict.
Just one more, and this has obviously been something you've been asked many times over the past year, but what is the U.S. going to do about it? I mean, the U.S. is obviously the major arms supplier to Israel, the major diplomatic supporter of Israel. You said that this incident is horrifying, and while you're trying to address and try to find out more information, what would be the consequences, if any, if the U.S. feels that this was without warrant? It's hard to say; it's justified in any case. But if the U.S. decides that this was what it was.
Look, so not to get ahead of things, but when it comes to assessing any one individual strike, it's something that we have to be very deliberate about and take time to assess the underlying circumstances to decide whether there was any particular potential legal violation and what the implications of that would be. I will say what we are going to do about it, though, is to continue to try and end the war and continue to impress upon to the government of Israel the need to end this war, to continue to work with the other mediators, Egypt and Qatar, to try and find a way forward to end this war, and to continue to work with partners throughout the region and throughout the world to present a plan for what follows the war, which would give Israel the confidence that they don't need to continue an endless fight, that there would be actual security in Gaza that would provide security for Israel too, and so that they can withdraw their forces from Israel and know that there isn't an ongoing threat to Israeli civilians and to the state of Israel. Sorry, Shannon, go ahead. I'll come to you next. I'm just going to go down the line, although then I've skipped Jillian. So I've skipped Jillian, sorry. Having promised Shannon Humair, I'll do Shannon Humair and then Jillian.
Going back to the letter sent by Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin to the Israeli government, it calls for the creation of a virtual channel to discuss civilian harm incidents and says the first virtual meeting of that channel should take place before the end of October. Has it happened yet, or is it on the books?
We have had conversations about the establishment of that channel. I don't have anything definitive yet to report. We continue to have conversations about how to establish that in a way that will be meaningful and will actually produce results.
Does the State Department consider that meeting or its equivalent to have taken place already?
I don't have an announcement to make today. We have a few days left in the month. Yeah.
Matt, so on that letter, I think that was sent about more than 2 weeks ago. does the United States have some sort of an interim assessment on how Israel has done so far in terms of fulfilling U.S. requirements, given what's going on in northern Gaza too?
So we have been watching and engaging with them about each of the steps that we called on them to implement in that letter. Now, I'm not, during this 30-day period, going to go through line by line and say which one has been implemented and which one has not, although we are very carefully tracking that. And we are engaging with them about specific steps that we want to see them take. But I don't think it's appropriate for me, while we're going through this process, to go through one by one and talk about where they are. Just speaking largely, though, or speaking broadly, I should say, we have seen some progress, but we haven't seen enough. So I said last week, what the Secretary said last week, it continues to be the case that we have seen them take some initial steps, but we need to see them do much more, and we are engaged with them to impress upon them the importance of doing much, much more.
Right. There is a lot of commentary out there, and in the law, there is no grace period. You are saying at this moment in time that you have not seen enough from Israel. So I just want to ask the question that a lot of people out there are asking: why not implement the law now?
We are implementing the law. We have not assessed them to be in violation of the law at this point.
But you're just saying they're not fulfilling the things that you want from them. That, I mean, they are impeding aid into Gaza.
That is not what I said.
They're not impeding.
That is not what I said. We have outlined a number of steps that we want to see them take in the letter.
Right.
Now, to answer your question, the reason why we didn't set an immediate deadline, or you have to implement all these steps 5 minutes after you get the letter, or you have to implement all these steps 7 days after the letter, is because there are some of the steps that we understand take actual time to implement. If you look at some of the, but we thought that 30 days was an appropriate measure, not 2 weeks. So we put 2 weeks in the letter. There were some things that we wanted to see happen immediately, and we saw some of those happen immediately. We saw Erez reopen immediately. We saw the Jordan route reopen immediately, and the letter made clear some things we want to see happen immediately, and then we need to see other things happen within 30 days. We're not yet at 30 days. I promise you we will have an extensive conversation about this at the end of that 30-day period, but we're in that window now.
I'm just having trouble understanding how the two things add up, and that is the Secretary has said, you've said, whatever Israel was doing to ensure more aid goes into Gaza, that has fallen off significantly. There hasn't been a sustained effort, and they have not been doing enough for a sustained period of time. How does that not mean that they're not impeding aid? Like, how can those two things be true at the same
because
time?
we have not judged them to have.
So despite the fact that they're not doing enough,
we had
they
not.
haven't been impeding aid.
So we thought it was appropriate that when we saw the decrease. Look, there are a lot of reasons that aid cannot make it in. Some of them can be intentional. Some of them can be unintentional. Some of them can be bureaucratic, either inside Israel system or inside the UN system. Some can be the effect of criminal looters, who obviously the government of Israel does not control and is not responsible for. And so, given all of those different factors that can go into the result that we saw, and the result that we saw was aid coming down more than 50% from its peak, we made clear that, look, on the things that you can control, on the things that the government of Israel can control, recognizing that you don't control everything, we want to see steps. And at the end of those steps, we will come back and talk about what the results have been.
Just one final thing on northern Gaza. When you were answering, I think, Shannon, you talked about this endless cycle that the Israeli military seems to be in right now. So is the U.S. calling the Israeli military to wrap up, to finish what it's doing in northern Gaza now?
We want to find a durable end to the war. And I say the durable end to the war is an important way to think about it. We've not called on Israel to just withdraw from Gaza and leave a vacuum there, because a vacuum actually doesn't help the Palestinian people, who would be once again living pretty immediately under Hamas's tyranny and would be potentially subject to the same jeopardy that Hamas has put them in for the past year by launching terrorist attacks against Israel. And it certainly wouldn't solve Israel's security problem. It would potentially land us back in the same place months or a few years down the road. And so that's why we are working to restart talks, which happened over the weekend, to try to find a durable end to the war. It's why we're working on the plans for what follows the war with our partners.
Oh, actually, just really the final one. On this special channel or like mechanism to talk about civilian harm incidents, you said you're still talking. Can you explain like why it hasn't been set up?
I don't have any more to read out today. It's an ongoing discussion between us and the government of Israel, and I just don't have any.
So when you say that you raised it with you raised this particular incident of today with the children killed,
yes,
you raised it with the U.S.
The United States raised it directly with the government.
It was the ambassador.
I'm not going to get into who, but it was conversations
Thanks.
from our government to theirs. Now, sorry to have.
Can I ask a quick off-topic question?
Say there are a number of lawyers in this building who are working on that question. The State Department lawyers are working on the question of whether or not Israeli military has violated international humanitarian law in Gaza or not. There are State Department lawyers working on that?
Of course there are. That's something we've said a number of times, that there are a number of questions, a number of
Within what process exactly?
I'm not going to get, so Humera, you know the answer to this question because
No, but
hold on,
like-
just let me finish before. You know the answer to this question because you asked it to me before, and I've answered it before. We have a number of ongoing processes to look at the facts of a number of incidents and to make specific assessments
Yes, but
about
I'm
those
pretty
incidents.
sure you didn't mention State Department lawyers are looking at it.
Of course
like
there's
you said, we have ongoing processes. So the L Bureau is involved.
So of course there are lawyers that Humera, first let me just back up and say, there is very little that we do here that doesn't involve lawyers in one way or the other. But of course, when it comes to making judgments about international humanitarian law, of course there are lawyers involved. They're not the only people involved, but yeah, of course.
And is this part of an atrocity determination process?
I'm not going to get into the processes that we have.
Can you say you don't have an atrocity
No,
determination process?
as I have said to you before, I don't think it's appropriate for me to talk about the underlying processes that we have underway while they're ongoing. Tom, can I go to Michelle and then come back to Tom? Because I've seen you come in.
Suggest that they not pass the UNRWA ban. Right above that, in that same letter, bullet point 3 of the 3 bullet points says that Israel should also end isolation of northern Gaza by reaffirming that there will be no Israeli government policy of forced evacuations of civilians from northern to southern Gaza, ensuring humanitarian organizations have continuous access to northern Gaza through northern crossings and from southern Gaza. Obviously, the 30 days isn't up, but 2 weeks ago, the situation in northern Gaza was bad. Like today, it's utterly dystopian. The opposite of making progress has happened there. Somebody mentioned the 109 civilians killed in this residential building as part of this forced evacuation. So it seems like neither of those two things have happened. And in fact, they've gone the opposite direction. Do you need the 30 days to make an assessment on at least that bullet?
So we have made clear that the situation in northern Gaza, which is what that bullet refers to, needs to change. And Secretary Blinken made clear directly to the Prime Minister last week that the situation in northern Gaza needs to change, that we need to see everyone in northern Gaza, every civilian in northern Gaza have access to food and water and other humanitarian assistance, and we're going to continue to make that clear.
Order on the South Africa genocide case, in Order 51-2A, I think it is, they say that Israel must take all necessary and effective measures to ensure, without delay, in full cooperation with the United Nations, the unhindered provision, to allow aid to get into Gaza. I mean, in full cooperation with the United Nations, or the country in question to then ban the primary UN agency that is responsible for that, does not seem like full cooperation.
So I will admit that do not remember. I read that order when it came down. I do not have it in front of me and do not have the provision that you're looking at to study. But we have made clear. I will say we've made clear, kind of in keeping with that order, precisely how important it is that UNRWA be allowed to continue. And even if you step back from UNRWA, how important it is that Israel cooperate with all of the UN agencies that are operating on the ground inside Gaza to deliver food, water, medicine, and other humanitarian assistance. And it continues to be critical that they take those steps.
But you talked about its importance, but this is a key organ of international humanitarian law that has made this order this year in the midst of this crisis. I mean, do you back that call by the ICJ?
We absolutely want to see humanitarian assistance get in. We want to see it get in through the other UN partners, and we want to see it get in through UNRWA.
And just finally, on this airstrike in Bet Lahia you referenced, you talked about, the war's gone on for a year. Getting here came at great cost to civilians in Gaza, often the case when civilians are caught in the crossfire of conflict. And I know you've used that phrase many times before. Is that a specific reference to this airstrike? Do you see this as crossfire?
No, as I also said, as you notice, if you would note, my full quote said, we don't know what happened in this strike. We don't know the particular circumstances. So no, it was about the broader conflict. When it comes to this particular strike, we have reached out to the government of Israel for information, made clear we want to know exactly what happened, how you could have a result that produces, according to reports, dozens of children dead, and we don't yet know the answer to that question.
I just raise it because it is an expression you've used and the Secretary's used many times about crossfire, including, when there have been many civilian casualties in airstrikes. I mean, the Palestinians do not have air defences, so I'm just sort of puzzled about this use of the phrase crossfire.
So I think it should be pretty clear. First of all, when I made clear it was about the broader
Absolutely,
conflict.
but I'm saying
Hold
it
on,
has
just
been
say,
used about
in the
airstrikes.
broader conflict, you do have Hamas leadership, Hamas battalions who locate themselves under civilian buildings and fire at Israeli forces from civilian buildings. Now, just to say, there are something, and that's crossfire, right? You have times when there are airstrikes that Israel carries out because they know that Hamas is located there. There are times they carry out airstrikes because they have IDF soldiers on the ground who are coming under fire from a particular location, and this is a standard military practice, obviously, and they call in an airstrike to take out that location because they have soldiers who are under fire from there. That's the definition of crossfire, I think.
Isn't it a bit disingenuous, though, because crossfire would be understood to mean if civilians are caught in crossfire, you would understand that usually to be an accident on the ground because people are literally caught in crossfire. But using it to describe airstrikes when many, many civilians are killed feels misleading.
I think crossfire means civilians caught between one military striking a terrorist organization or another military, or a terrorist organization striking a military, and that is what is happening in these incidents. Yeah, Abby.
You said earlier, and this is a hypothetical, but I'm starting with your own hypothetical, if this UNRWA legislation was implemented.
Hypothetical on a hypothetical.
Well, following on yours, if this UNRWA legislation is implemented, just digging down on that, you've described them as irreplaceable, that there's no alternative. So at that point, would you assess that Israel is directly or indirectly impeding the delivery of humanitarian
I
aid?
really can't predict what kind of an assessment we will make in the future. I made clear our concerns over it, and I made clear we're going to watch over the coming days what happens with the implementation of this law, but where we will land, I'm not going to forecast today.
And then there are some reports from earlier this week that the IDF detained medical staff within one of the largest hospitals in northern Gaza. The UN said yesterday that they left 2 doctors to take care of hundreds of patients. Is the U.S. Asking Israel about what led them to detain those medical staff, and are you satisfied with their answer?
We are asking. I don't have an answer yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you concerned about?
Certainly, we would be concerned about the reports of doctors being detained if it prevented doctors from, if there was no reasonable basis for that detention and it was preventing them from carrying out critical life-saving work. Absolutely, we would be concerned about that. But as always, we want to establish the actual facts, and we're looking into it and asking the government of Israel for more information. Janie.
Thank you, Matt. A couple of questions on Russia and North Korea, and I will follow up, if I may. North Korea's foreign minister went to Russia to discuss additional dispatch of North Korean troops. And Russian foreign minister Sergei Lavrov claimed that the dispatch of North Korean troops was legally justified under the Russia and North Korea mutual military treaty. Do you think that the dispatch of North Korean troops to help Russia's illegal war is a violation of international law?
We do. We believe that Russia's training of DPRK soldiers involving arms or related material is a direct violation of Security Council Resolutions 1718, 1874, and 2270. And DPRK soldiers providing or receiving any training or other assistance related to the use of ballistic missiles or other arms would violate Resolutions 1718, 1874, and 2070, in addition to Russia and the DPRK's ongoing UN arms embargo violations.
And one more, the UN Security Council meeting on the North Korea's military deployment will be held tomorrow. As you know, sanctions in the Security Council will be difficult due to opposition from China and Russia. Recently, the United States and South Korea and Japan and their allies have established a multilateral sanctions system against North Korea. Can sanctions on military cooperation between Russia and North Korea be implemented through this system?
So the multilateral sanctions monitoring team is a mechanism for examination, analysis, and public reporting on the implementation of UN sanctions measures against the DPRK. It's not a sanctions imposing mechanism itself, but of course we do maintain the ability to impose sanctions on both Russia and North Korea. We've shown we're willing to use those abilities and authorities in the past, and we will continue to do so when appropriate.
Does the United States delegation to visit Ukraine, because South Korea already visited NATO and Ukraine?
So we
do you
have
have any?
We have U.S. delegations who are traveling to Ukraine virtually every week. I don't have one to announce today, but it's quite regular for to see U.S. officials visiting Ukraine. The Secretary of Defense was there last week. Secretary Blinken was there last month, and we have a number of important visits coming in the coming days. The Chief of Staff to Ukraine's president is here today, meeting with Secretary Blinken and others from the United States, from the U.S. government.
Thank you.
So there are multiple reports saying that the new appointed head of Hezbollah is in Iran. Given that Israelis started as soon as the announcement came officially about his appointment that they're going to take him out, is U.S. concerned that Israeli taking him out in Iran will intensify the situation in the region, especially with the Iranians saying that they are preparing for attack on Israel?
I don't want to comment on a hypothetical action in any way.
Okay, and I have another one regarding comments by Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield today. She said that the United States made clear to Prime Minister Netanyahu that 1 year into the conflict, Israel must address catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The United States rejects any Israeli efforts to starve Palestinians in Jabalia or elsewhere, and that Israel's word must be matched by action on the ground. Right now, that is not happening. This must change immediately. So can we take this to mean that the U.S. is acknowledging that there are Israeli efforts to starve Palestinians? And how should we see this in the context of the mid-October letter sent by Secretaries Austin and Blinken?
I don't think that's the way you should take it. I think you should take it to be consistent with the letter that the Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin sent, where they made quite clear that we're concerned about the humanitarian situation. You heard me address yesterday, we're particularly concerned about the humanitarian situation in Jabalia, where food isn't getting in right now and water isn't getting in right now. And that does need to change. And that's what Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield was making clear in those remarks.
Can we stay on the Lebanon
Yeah.
part of that just for a second? I mean, there are multiple reports coming out of both Beirut and out of Israel that the U.S. has proposed some kind of a ceasefire plan for Lebanon that would call for a full implementation of UNSCR 1701 with the withdrawals by both Hezbollah and Israel within 2 months. Is that at all your understanding of where?
So I don't want to get into the private diplomatic conversations that we're having, including about what any potential timetables might be. But we have been making clear in those conversations that we want to see, as part of a diplomatic resolution, the full implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701. And that means Hezbollah withdrawing north of the Litani River. It means Israel ultimately withdrawing south of the Blue Line. And it means peace and stability. And what we're working on to get to that point are ways to bolster the Lebanese armed forces to ensure that they can provide security and they can provade stability in southern Lebanon. Alex.
Thank you. Very quickly, Iran, they want to move back to Ukraine again. In the case of Jamshid Sharma, you tweeted about Iran murdering a U.S. person, California resident. Some of us have been covering this case. You told us for months that you will be judging the Islamic Republic by their action. Well, this is their action.
Yeah, and I think we've made quite clear what we think about this action, as we made quite clear what we think about previous actions that the Iranian government has taken. And you've seen us, since the outset of this administration, impose more than 700 sanctions on Iran and Iran entities for a number of actions, including their human rights violations against their own people. We condemn the execution of German-Iranian dual citizen Jamshid Sharmad, which reminds us once again of the brutality and repression that characterizes the Iranian regime. We offer our sincere condolences to his loved ones. We have been in touch with them to express those condolences directly. This is the latest abhorrent act by Iran following the transnational repression it committed when it abducted him. It also underscores the record pace of unjust executions in Iran continues unabated despite Iran's attempts to promote a gentler face to the international community. So we are in touch with the German government, we are in touch with the European Union and our other allies, and we will continue to stand with them in holding the Iranian regime accountable for its brutal human rights abuses.
You told us in the past that you believe that the Iranian supreme leader is in charge of decision-making process. So by refusing to sanction him in the past, in the Gaza case and other cases, do you think you're actually creating an atmosphere in which is acting in.
Alex, I just went through the litany of sanctions that we have imposed on Iran, and I'll remind you that we have worked with other entities around the world to impose sanctions on Iran. If you look at what happened in just the last month, you saw our European allies step up for the first time and impose sanctions on Iran Air, which will have real implications for that airline's ability to operate flights between Iran and European destinations. So I will make no apologies for our efforts to hold Iran accountable for its behavior.
Thank you. On Ukraine, you spoke about your mock meeting. I know I understand you might not want to get ahead of the meeting, but
here's a question about it.
Two questions actually. If
Here's a question to get ahead of the
If you
meeting.
indulge me, there are reports
The White
that.
House has already put out a statement about his meeting with Jake.
He met with Jake earlier. He's meeting with the secretary. That meeting with the
White House
secretary.
statement's already out.
Right. Well, I apologize for not putting out a statement about a meeting that hasn't happened yet here at the
How much of the
Department.
issue of North Korea, supplying, the troops for Russia to fight in Ukraine will be the subject?
Certainly, that will be one of the topics
I
that
think
they
of course,
cover.
the U.S. will not impose restrictions in future if that is the case. Can you confirm that this is actually in?
I'm not going to comment on those reports.
well,
Let me, Alex, that was 4 or 5. I got to move on. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, a couple of weeks ago, Department of Justice indicted an Indian agent for a murder plot against a Sikh human rights lawyer in New York. You told us that U.S. wants to see meaningful accountability by the Modi government, but that agent still has not been arrested. So what are the next steps? Is U.S. seeking his extradition?
So that's a matter I would refer you to the Justice Department on when it comes to a question of extradition. That, of course, is a legal matter. We always defer to DOJ to speak to extradition. But I will tell you that we have been in dialogue with the government of India about this matter. Of course, they sent a delegation here 2 weeks ago to directly brief U.S. government officials on the status of their investigation, and we briefed them on the status of our investigation. And we made clear in that meeting, but we will continue to make clear that it is important there be real accountability.
Sir, after the killing of Sikh leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Canada by Indian agents, Canadian authorities expelled all Indian agents serving in the Indian High Commission. And there are some unconfirmed reports that same action took place here in Washington, D.C. Could you confirm or deny State Department expelled the Indian agents serving in High Commission here in D.C.? Or?
I'm not familiar with this report that we expelled Indian diplomats.
Yes,
No.
the Indian agents who are serving here in.
I'm not aware of any such expulsion. No. Ryan. Yeah, and then we'll go to Ryan.